I'm Drew Hutchison. You're tuned to Local Bias. We come to you from 393 Main Street in Greenfield, and we're seen throughout western Massachusetts. Well, okay, we're seen in Hadley and Greenfield and other parts of Massachusetts, western Massachusetts. And you can see us on the interweb, or whatever that thing is called. So it doesn't matter where you are. You don't have to be in western Massachusetts. Don Campbell, thank you for coming on the show. You're one of my favorite guests. I say that to a lot of people because I have a lot of favorite guests, and you are among them. And one of the things that I enjoy about you so much is that when you sat down today, I says, well, Don, what are we going to talk about? Because I don't always know, because there are so many avenues of interest
Yes.
that you take us down. And today you wanted to talk about the productive capacity of the planet, or what were you referring to?
The net primary production.
Okay, so what is net primary production?
Well, every year, because of the sunlight, the plants produce all the food that every living creature needs to live, whether directly or indirectly, because they're living on, maybe they're carnivores. But that is the net primary production, the extra growth that happens every year because of the sun. There is no other way that energy is transformed into food on the planet.
So the miracle of photosynthesis.
Right. And if you're thinking that we can use chemicals to do it, well, most of those chemicals, if not all of them, are hydrocarbons, which are made by living things.
Right.
So you eventually, you come to the point where it's a zero-sum game. That is, only all the food that exists for life, all forms of life, comes from that annual increase due to the sun.
And when we're using fossil fuels, we're basically using yesterday's sunlight.
We're using the capital stored up. Yep.
Right, but we're not replenishing it.
Right. And capital, we all can use some capital for a moment, for a little bit. Maybe we're buying a house. Mm-hmm. But you can't just keep dipping into it, or it'll be gone, and then you're getting stuck with only having the net primary production for the year to live on.
Right.
And for some of us, that would be difficult, at least at times. Mm-hmm. But we're talking about every living thing on Earth.
Okay, so then things die.
Right. And the thing with how we're living today, humans are using a bigger and bigger chunk. And we have to, this whole thing we have to share with every other living thing. And so we're up to 20-25%.
Now, how much of that is simply from our population increasing, and how much?
Certainly a lot of it.
And how much of it is simply because we are such amazing consumers?
Good point. That's another part of it, because when we build things, we are also taking areas that could be productive mm-hmm. out of circulation.
So you mean if you're mining, you clearly can't grow food where there's a mine?
That's correct. That's doing that. Or even rooftops.
Okay.
From a planning perspective, the rooftops in the nation are the largest and most arid desert.
Because there's nothing grown on the roofs.
There's nothing grown on the roofs.
So that has changed. Apparently in some cities they have now,
that's right.
In Chicago even,
that's right. There are places where it's actually required now.
Right.
That's a very small step in the right direction, but it is in the right direction.
So it's doable?
It is doable in some places, yes.
Okay.
Yep. And so, but that's the kind of thing. Paving roads, making new roads, is also taking things out of production. And on top of that, the water flow gets damaged, and also down, even not under the road, but along with it, you can lose habitat that is part of that cycle, the nutrient cycle and the mm-hmm. biological cycle.
So how much of this is related to I've recently been reading about how we've lost a lot of insects, of biomass of insects. Is that a symptom of what you're talking about?
I would think so, yes. I mean, there are insects actually that some people eat, mm-hmm. and there's a growing interest in crickets as a form of human nutrition. Mm-hmm. I haven't tried them myself. I'm not sure how eager I am to try them. But
I'd love to try them.
But I'd be interested mm-hmm. in it, yeah. But yes, it is a part of it. Plus what we have done with the hydrocarbons, which is the capital that was stored up through the net primary production. Some of it got stored up for the long term as oil and gas.
So wouldn't nuclear power then be the answer? Because then you're harnessing the power of atoms as opposed to worrying about the photosynthesis.
That's a very interesting thought. Nuclear power, and
I'm opposed to nuclear power, but if there's solutions, let's look at the solutions.
That's right. My concern, I talked with a friend of mine now he's deceased, but he had been an engineer at Vermont Yankee. And I said, I have concerns about the whole chain from the beginning of the coal and the waste and the whole business.
Right, the extraction.
But I said, let's talk about just the operation of the plant.
Okay.
Because he had been an engineer there. He retired, and of course he was very discouraged by what he found after Entergy bought it.
Right.
When he was called back. He said the morale had just gone down the tubes. Mm-hmm. But besides that, that was part of the conversation, because I said the thing that concerns me is you guys as engineers don't get to decide all that's important to decide about how the plant is run.
Right.
And what makes up safety.
No, the bean counters. Ultimately.
Yeah, some private business concerned someplace is trying to make a buck.
Right.
And they'll cut corners. Invariably,
right.
They will cut corners.
They're looking to make profit. It's a for-profit. Entergy is a for-profit company.
Right. So whoever's owning the thing is going to cut corners someday. That worries me. And the government oversight comes and goes on the whims of political, the political business.
Right.
And I don't trust that. And he said to me, that's my opinion too. And we hadn't gotten to the part of, discussing whether or not it's smart to mine uranium in Africa and what it takes to ship it over here. It may well have a role in nuclear power, in baseload power production. You may know that many places around here, farms and stuff, are encouraged to get all-night streetlights. Yeah. A lot of the times they don't need them.
Yes.
Part of it is we have this big base load. We want to make more power at night.
So they need a demand for it at night.
They need a demand to make it profitable, because they have to. For the system to work, they have to keep running what the power company calls spinning reserves.
Right.
Spinning reserves are just spinning. They're not necessarily making power until the demand is there. Then they can put it into production instantly.
Right.
Well, the more capacity they build like that, the more they want people to do things at night.
Sure.
And that's a problem. But there is a base load need. I mean, there are hospitals that run all night and things. There's
all the servers, the internet uses a tremendous amount of energy.
Well, that's right. And so there's all this energy being used all the time, but it's also that we want you to use more at night. Let's see if we can use less at night and use renewables when we can. Mm-hmm. They're not unreliable. It's variable.
Okay.
That's the right word for the production.
But if you have a wide system, then being variable is not an issue, because, it's sunny over in the Mojave Desert, and we have a bunch of solar panels there right now. So who cares that it's a little bit cloudy in New England? Isn't it all?
That's a little far for the electricity to flow. But yes, it's essentially that's the right point. And the engineers can solve a lot of this stuff. Mm-hmm. There was last year, the year before, Scotland on the year made more electricity than they used.
Right.
Mostly because of wind.
Now, but we're kind of getting off topic, because we were talking about the nutrients as opposed to electrical energy.
That's right. One of the things about the withholding, when I talked to a class at Greenfield Community College, I went through the whole cycle, and I said, so what is it that we withhold? What are the things that we withhold? What's the one really important thing that we withhold? And we got to the body. One kid got up and said our bodies. Yeah,
they're in caskets, they're buried in the ground, and it takes forever for them to decompose and return the carbon.
Right. So my big concern is, how do we change our thinking to recognize this? And that comes into for me, when is enough enough?
Right.
How much do I need?
Right.
Yes, and I'm not meaning to be judgmental about things. I mean, people have different needs, and they've come from different places. I don't know
But also, isn't it human nature, or isn't it even biological? Isn't it DNA's nature? The DNA, I want to pass on my DNA.
Yeah.
Well, to do that, I need to have as many resources as possible.
Perhaps.
Because that makes me feel that I have the ability to pass on my DNA.
I think that's. I think we've gone way past that.
Okay.
I
So
mean-
you think it's a culturally embedded, not just genetically.
I think so. Yes. And
So that's a good news in a way, because if it's cultural, cultures change.
That's true. And that's what we have to think about, you know. And one of the things that I have admired about some communities and some societies is that they could have expanded some. I'm thinking of the Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois, and the Amish. They could expand some, but they take the extra energy they have a lot and put it into social activity.
Okay.
Such as ceremony, rites, you know, community events. It doesn't use up a whole lot of energy to have a contra dance,
Right.
or to do the corn dance for the Haudenosaunee.
Okay.
You know, that the art and the creativity is where we can make that greater complexity that we want
Without
come to life.
Without diminishing the resources.
That's right. That's right. So there's a direction that we can take. How many boats does somebody need? Well, you know, people have talked about owning big things cooperatively. That's
Right.
one way to do it. There's a number. There are other ways of, and a lot of it is working in the wetware. I would say, you know, that what we want, thinking through what we want and how do we get it. We want pleasure. We want community.
Yep.
We want, after we're warm enough and fed enough, and our kids are safe, what more do we want? You know?
Well, I think people want to be entertained.
And part of that, we can do it ourselves.
Sure.
I was at a meeting not long ago, and somebody said, when did we lose our music? Meaning the music I can make. I'm thinking, when the radio came into existence. People stopped making their own singing songs at home because, well, I can't sing as well as that guy.
Right.
Or that woman, you know?
Right.
So now we've got to a point where we don't even imagine sitting down and singing songs together very much. We've lost something, and that is free. And you can do it anywhere, at any time. When two or three or more are around, you can do it.
Well, as a musician who plays music every week with my friends, typically, I wholeheartedly agree with you, because that brings me a tremendous amount of pleasure, a tremendous amount of belonging to something greater than myself, because together we are creating in that moment something that's beautiful.
And doesn't use a whole army of resources that might be involved in keeping a second house.
Right.
That kind of thing. Exactly. And it's just a shift in our thinking. It's not, that shift could make a big difference in the end. It's not the only piece of work that has to get done at all.
Well,
but it is, that shift of thinking is a fundamental part of the work that has to get done.
But over, I suppose it's like, in some ways, you know, we're taking a look at climate change right now. And it's happening faster and faster, just as it was predicted. And people are going to have to adapt. And I think that, and it may not be enough, but it's bound to happen. Cultures have changed. I mean, think about recycling. 30 years ago, how much did people recycle? They recycle far more now. How much do people think about alternative energy now? So even though it's poo-pooed on certain levels where you have the profit motive that maybe is looking to keep this from happening, there has been a shift. I mean, I take a look at my yard. I have a yard that I let the weeds grow. There's a section of my yard that is totally just all weeds, whatever grows, and it's because I'm supporting the local local bees, the native bees, the native bugs, helping the birds out. I mean, this idea of the pristine green lawn where it's a monoculture and it's full of pesticides and fertilizers.
It's industrial.
It's industrial. I have a neighbor who has a yard like that, and it kind of sickens me to see it. And yet, that used to be what everyone aspired to. Right. And there are more of my neighbors now that are growing milkweed like I do. So it is shifting.
That's right.
And it can shift.
That's right.
But it seems like it's always going back and forth.
And in the end, all that we do, we cannot know whether it'll be enough.
Right.
But does that mean we shouldn't do it?
Not at all. Of course not.
Yes, and Francis Groves, a friend of mine, once said, you have to do things not because you expect results, but because it's the right thing to do.
Absolutely.
And I believe that. And I also know that as humans, we're limited. We have our limitations, and we can't make big changes dramatically all on our own, all at once.
Right.
So I would invite people to think about just what are the small things that they can do for themselves right now. Mm-hmm. Just small things, like inviting the bugs and the bees to come and the birds to play in your backyard.
Right.
If you haven't done that. Back when Judy and I had wine in the house, which we don't now, but I thought, well, a lot of these wines, they come from Australia, California, from Europe. There's got to be something better close by. Let's experiment.
Right.
And we settled on some good Bully Hill, that's right, was the wine, but also discovered the hard cider being made in Coleraine.
Yep.
And a wonderful blueberry wine being made down in I think it was Huntington, it could have been Chester.
Right.
And it was fun to do that.
Well, and that's an interesting question too. It's like, well, is it more important to have organic, or is it more important to have something local? Because if you're having something organic trucked from the other side of the planet, well, then that's having a carbon impact.
That's right. And part of my point too was you can find the things that are meaningful to you that you can have some fun with.
Right. I make cider, so that's local apples, and it's a lot of fun.
And the thing, taking care of each other is really in the end all we have. We have to think larger than ourselves and our own wants, and figure out what our shared wants are.
I mean, don't we have also anyone that has children wants their children to grow up to be happy and healthy, and by extension, their children's children, and so on and so forth. But we seem to have been doing the opposite. We seem to be leaving a world in worse shape for our children.
Yeah.
So how did we get there? I mean, is that just Madison Avenue has convinced us to be consumers, and it's rewired how we would normally behave?
We have too much stuff.
We have too much stuff.
We're eating into our capital so we can play. We're fiddling while Rome burns is really what it amounts to. And to be, if you look at the whole thing and step back and look at the whole thing, it's terrifying. Which is why I've chosen to say I love my county and the county area, the larger area, and I understand that people can only make what's in front of them, a small change at a time.
Right.
I can't be judgmental about what that small change is for you or for another person.
Well, and being judgmental is, quite frankly, counterproductive. In fact, the whole PC movement came about because people didn't like the fact that there were words being bandied about that were harmful.
Right.
And yet then what happened is some of the people who were promulgating the PC attitude started using it as a way to beat up on people.
Right. That's right.
Which is not very PC.
No, and there was a movie that I saw that the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation made called Trial at Fortitude Bay. And attorneys had to travel from Ottawa up to this Arctic community. And the main point was that I want to make now is the defense solicitor, or whatever they call them in Canada, was talking with one of the village elders. And he said, you've forgotten the most important thing, taking care of each other in the place where you live. And that's part of what would lessen the tension of using stuff. People use too much, it's a replacement. It's like when people say you eat too much, you drink too much, you use this, you do that.
That's a symptom.
As a symptom of, not always, I'm not going to condemn any of these things, but as a symptom of there's something I'm trying to fill, there's a void. Well, and if we pay attention to each other, those voids become smaller. Well, and hence the use we make of resources becomes smaller.
Well, I just think, for instance, when this has happened so quickly in the last, 5 or 10 years, is that if you go out, everyone's on their devices. Today I took my daughter to the orthodontist, and I'm sitting there, and every adult that was waiting for their child had their phone out and was reading something. They had to be entertained, they had to be engaged, they had to be connected through this device with something that interested them. What about just sitting there?
Yep.
Or talking?
Yep. And I am sometimes that person, and it bothers me. Mm-hmm. And that touches a subject that I haven't figured out how to deal with. Many of the materials used to make our fancy electronics are blood minerals. Mm-hmm. People are dying to both to get them out of the ground and processed, but also to control the areas where they're available. And I don't want to be part of that. And yet we're happily developing, making more electronic toys. Also, we had to upgrade a computer. Mm-hmm. And we looked at the amount of power that it uses. Mm-hmm. Well, we upgraded the computer, got rid of the old one, but the new one uses probably 25% more electricity. So nationwide, a lot of people are upgrading their computers. Sure. They don't think of it at all as a serious thing, mm-hmm. but they're also upgrading their electric use.
Right.
And so we're talking about millions of households. It's incremental, but it might shorten the time till we need the next power plant by a good percentage. And we're in this spiral that we're just going to keep doing this kind of thing unless we start to take a deep breath and slow ourselves down. And that's a human thing. That's something we can do. And the prescription is different for everybody.
Right, but you have to personally identify that it's an issue, and even in order to act on it. And I think most people would say, what? I'm talking to my grandmother, that's a good thing.
And it is.
It is a good thing, right.
And, a lot of my phone, my daughter sent it to me so I could see pictures of my grandkids.
Right.
That's a good thing, and I'm glad to do it. Well, it's got expanded a little bit beyond that, but because I've gotten used to the phone. But yeah, it's a mixed bag, and all of our technologies are a mixed bag.
No, but
and I will say this, that to live right, we've always had the technology. New technologies, we make them.
Right.
That's okay. That's good sometimes. But we've always had the technologies that could let us live a good, decent, healthy human life. Whatever technologies we had were sufficient, or we wouldn't be here.
Right.
So it's not technology will save us. Technology may be part of what we need, some changes, because of the hole we've dug ourselves into.
Right.
But it's not the answer in and of itself.
I get that, but in a way, when you said it's the answer, I keep thinking, like, for instance, sequestering carbon and methane, which is even worse.
Yep.
We have to find a way, if we can't control it's being released and making things worse, then we have to find a way to sequester it quicker.
Yep.
Or better.
Put it in the soil.
So how do you do that?
There's
on a grand scale.
Yeah, no, that's right. There are problems, there are difficulties with it, but everything we're talking about, everything anybody's talking about to help change the course we're on, all those things take a lot of time.
Right, and we have.
And so there was a book I read recently that just blew me away. Soil Will Save Us, and it talked about the problems of in Africa first, that they were putting up fences to protect their species, and the environment was degrading. Mm-hmm. Now what? Why is that? Well, because they weren't free to roam like they had been.
Right.
And in the roaming, they were subject to predation. So they'd find an area that had a lot of good stuff, they'd eat a lot of it up, poop all over the place, but they stayed in the knot. Mm-hmm. So every time they came by that same general route, they'd be doing a different place in a different place. And that replenished, and all the hooves digging up the ground,
the buffalo,
so the rain, so it could hold the rain.
That's right.
And so now they're incorporating that notion in some farming practices. And somebody in it was Nebraska or some Midwest state like that, the story that what they were talking about, this guy had started doing it with managing his pastures, looking at the pasture grasses, and managing his cattle that way. And within a few years, the carbon in the soil went from a few feet to over 10 feet. It didn't take that many years.
Right.
And why? We're working with nature, not against it.
So and then that's not a high-tech solution. That's simply, that's almost just, oh, we figured this out.
That's right. The technology is really in our minds and not in the things.
So I suppose, Don, are you saying then there is hope?
Yeah, I don't know whether it will be realized, but yes.
Okay.
There is hope, and whether we realize it or not depends on the wetware.
Okay.
In our hearts and in our brains, and living together more like real people.
Right.
People to people and not people to thing.
Well, I'm encouraged. It gets depressing sometime, but we've also run out of time.
There you go.
So, Don, thank you for coming on. Doesn't it just fly by? I mean, I swear
Yeah.
we just scratched the surface.
Right.
If you have any interest in Don Campbell, Don, should anyone reach out to you? Do you have any contact information you'd like to share? Or should they just go to the library and start doing research?
Well, that's always a good thing to do.
Okay, go to the library.
But I am willing to talk to people, and I can give you I'll give you my cell phone number.
Okay, I'll put it on the screen in the post-production.
Okay.
So we'll write it down. Actually, I have it already. So thank you for joining us. I'm Drew Hutchison. This is Local Bias. I hope that you're having a great time saving the planet, because let's do this together, okay?
And meanwhile, have some fun doing it.
Why not?
Exactly.
All right, take care.
The best thing about this gig has been learning all of these Kinks songs. It's really been a great treat. So we're going to start off now with a wonderful old one that you probably know, and if you want to sing along, obviously that's great. And it's called Sunny Afternoon. 1, 2, 3, 4.